Okay, this is the second part of 7.5. The homework was 35 to 48 all, and I'm just going to do the odd problems for you. When you're dealing with problems that have two terms in the denominator, like 2 and negative square root of 7, instead of just a radical, you're going to multiply by the conjugates of the conjugate of the denominator. And what a conjugate is it's basically exactly the same as the denominator. The only difference is we're going to change the middle sign. So when I multiply by the conjugate, I'm going to say 2 plus the square root of 7 over 2 plus the square root of 7. So notice it's the same as the denominator. The only difference is that middle sign is different. I changed it from minus to plus. So now we're going to multiply our numerators, leaving us 6 times 2 plus the square root of 7 over. When you're multiplying conjugates, you can take your first two terms and multiply them together. So 2 times 2 is 4. And then you can take your second two terms and multiply them together. So negative the square root of 7 times positive the square root of 7 is negative the square root of 49. Now go ahead and leave your numerator in this factored form because you never know, something could cancel later on. Now we know the square root of 49 is 7. So this becomes 6 times 2 plus the square root of 7 all over 4 minus 7, which is negative 3. So it's a good thing that we went ahead and left that 6 factored out, because now the 6 divided by negative 3 is negative 2, which leaves you negative 2 times 2 plus the square root of 7. And that is your answer. Okay, so again, because we're dealing with the square root of x minus 3, instead of just something like the square root of x, we need to multiply by the conjugate. The conjugate of this denominator is the square root of x plus 3. Same exact thing, the only difference is this middle number. Okay, so make sure you have your parentheses so you don't get confused. So I have negative 7 times the square root of x plus 3 all over, and remember, when you're dealing with conjugates, multiply the first two together. So this becomes the square root of x squared minus the last two together. Negative 3 times 3 is negative 9. Okay, so I'm going to clean this up. Negative 7 times the square root of x plus 3 all over the squared and the square root cancel each other out, leaving you x minus 9. And that is as far as you can go. Okay, again, we're dealing with a conjugate, so we're going to write the conjugate of the denominator, which is the square root of 2 minus the square root of 3 over the square root of 2 minus the square root of 3. Make sure that you put your parentheses around everything. In the numerator, we're going to have to double distribute, okay, because these are not conjugates. In the denominator, they are conjugates, so that's going to be pretty simple to take care of. But first, we're going to have to do the square root of 2 times the square root of 2, which is the square root of 4. The square root of 2 times negative square root of 3 is negative. Okay, nothing has changed here. We're still dealing with a conjugate. The only difference is now we've got a coefficient out in front, but that's okay. So when we multiply by the conjugate here, we're going to say 2 square roots of a plus the square root of b all over 2 square roots of a plus the square root of b. Because remember, conjugate, you want the same as the denominator, just change the middle sign. And then I'm writing my parentheses because I'm going to need to double distribute the numerator. So the numerator, I'm going to say the square root of a times 2 square roots of a. So that's going to give me 2 square root of a squared. Then I'm going to say the square root of a times the square root of b, which is the square root of ab. Then I'm going to take 1 times 2 square roots of a, which is going to give me 2 square roots of a. And then I have 1 times the square root of b, which is going to give me the square root of b. My denominator is conjugate, so again, you're going to multiply your first two together, which is going to give you 4 the square root of a squared minus the negative square root of b times the square root of b, that's where I got the minus from, minus the square root of b squared. Okay? In the numerator, all of my indexes are the same. However, all of my radicans are different. So I cannot add anything together on this one. Okay? However, down in my denominator, there's a couple things I can do. The square root and the square cancel here, and the square root and the square cancel here. So that's going to leave your answer 2. Oh, and I'm sorry. The square root and the square cancel here. So then this becomes 2a plus the square root of ab plus 2 square roots of a plus the square root of b all over 4a minus b. And nothing can cancel because all of these pluses and minuses mean that it's all one thing and you can't just pick and choose what you want to use. Okay, so let's see if there's any way we can simplify 10. 10 is 5 and 2, so nothing changes. So I'm going to go ahead and multiply by the conjugate, which is 1 minus the square root of 10 over 1 minus the square root of 10. Get your parentheses so you don't get confused when you're multiplying. So your numerator is going to be 8 times 1 minus the square root of 10 over, and remember when you're multiplying the conjugates, multiply your first terms together. So 1 times 1 is 1. Then multiply your second terms together. Minus the square root of 100. Okay? You know the square root of 100 is 10. So change this to 10. And then you have 8 times the quantity 1 minus the square root of 10 all over 1 minus 10, which is negative 9. You can't go any further than that. So go ahead and stop there. Okay, so here we're also going to have to multiply by the conjugate. So that's going to be the square root of x minus the square root of y over the square root of x minus the square root of y. And then make sure you put your parentheses around here. So it's the square root of x times the square root of x minus the square root of y all over, remember, multiply your first two terms together, which gives you the square root of x squared, and then your last two terms together. So it's square root of y times negative square root of y, which is negative square root of y squared. Okay? You know that your squared and your square roots cancel each other. So your denominator is just x minus y. And I would go ahead and distribute this now that you see that nothing's going to cancel. Because what happens is it gives you the square root of x squared, because the square root of x times the square root of x is the square root of x squared, minus the square root of xy. And the reason we did that is because the square root and the square cancel each other, which leave you x minus the square root of xy all over x minus y. Now I know someone's going to ask, oh, can I go ahead and cancel these x's? No. This is one thing, x minus the square root of xy. This minus marries these two things together. And this is one expression because the x and the y are married together with this minus sign. You cannot cancel these two x's out. So this is your final answer. Okay, we're going to do the same thing here on this last one. We're going to multiply by the conjugate of the denominator. So that's going to be 4 square root of 3 plus the square root of 6 over 4 square root of 3 plus the square root of 6. Make sure you put your parentheses around these as well. Alright, you're going to have to double distribute the numerator. So I'm going to do 2 square root of 3 times 4 square root of 3. Remember, I multiply the coefficients first, so 2 times 4 is 8. And then I multiply the radicals. So square root of 3 times the square root of 3 is the square root of 9. Now you're going to multiply 2 square root of 3 times the square root of 6. So that gives me plus 2 square root of 18. Then the square root of 6 times 4 square roots of 3, which is going to give me plus 4 square root of 18. Then the square root of 6 times the square root of 6, which is going to give me plus the square root of 36. Remember, when you're multiplying conjugates, multiply the first two terms together. So that becomes 16 square root of 9. And then multiply your last two together. Negative square root of 6 times the square root of 6 is negative square root of 36. Okay, so let's see what we can do. The square root of 9 is 3, so that gives me 8 times 3. Square root of 9 is 3, so that gives me 16 times 3. Square root of 36 is 6. Square root of 36 is 6. So 8 times 3 is 24. These are like terms, so I can add them together. They both have the square root of 18, so you say 2 plus 4 is 6. Square root of 18 plus 6 all over 16 times 3 is 48 minus 6. Okay, if I clean this up, 24 plus 6 is 30 plus 6 square root of 18 all over 48 minus 6 is 42. Now, all of this can be reduced, but be careful, the square root of 18 can be simplified. So if I take the square root of 18, it becomes 9 times 2 and then 3 times 3. I only need 2 in order to bring one out front, so the square root of 18 is actually 3 square roots of 2. So I'm going to rewrite my answer, and instead of square root of 18, which is what I had before, I'm going to write 3 square root of 2. So times 3 square root of 2 all over 42. So then I have 30 plus 18, because 6 times 3 is 18, square root of 2 over 42. Now again, in order to be able to reduce anything, you have to factor something out of this. You can't just reduce because of this plus sign. So what do 30 and 18 have in common? They have 2 in common. They have 3 in common. They have 6 in common. No, I think 6 is as high as it's going to go. Let's see. So I have, if I factor out a 6, I'm left with 5 plus 3 square root of 2, and it's all over 42. And the whole reason we did that is so we can reduce these. 6 over 42 reduces to 1 over 7. So then I have 5 plus 3 square root of 2 all over 7. And that is your final answer. And that completes this homework. Good job.